Alright, let's start with the classic, scaphism. Not to be confused with the absolute banger Escapism by Ray and 070 Shake. Escapism was honestly one of the most disgusting punishments ever invented. Like, whoever came up with this definitely woke up and chose violence, but in a weirdly creative way. Here's how it worked. They would trap you between two boats, or sometimes hollow logs, with only your head, hands, and feet sticking out. You're basically in a wooden prison, unable to move. Then they would force feed you milk and honey. But hey, at first you might think, okay, that's not so bad, who doesn't love free food? Except milk and honey together have some aggressive side effects. Then this is where it goes from bad to, I need to delete this from my brain. They'd cover your entire body with more honey and milk. You're basically getting the Diddy treatment here, except instead of baby oil, it's honey and milk. And then they just leave you out in the sun on a lake or a pond. Because you know who loves honey? Literally every insect. Flies, bees, wasps, ants. The whole squad pulls up on you like you're an all-you-can-eat buffet. And since your digestive system is absolutely not okay, you'd be shitting your pants within a few hours. So now, you're just lying down there in your own filth, which attracts even more creatures. People would last days like this, getting eaten alive by insects, baking in the sun, unable to move, marinating in their own waste, probably questioning every life choice that led to this moment. So yeah, I guess the good old days weren't actually that good after all. Now, if you've watched Vikings on Netflix or played Assassin's Creed Valhalla, you might have heard of this one. Or if you've seen Midsommar, you're probably about to get flashbacks. Vikings had the Blood Eagle method reserved for their most hated enemies. We're talking kings, important prisoners, people who really pissed them off. They would make you lie face down, tie you up so you can't move, and then they would take a knife or axe and make a cut along your spine. They would carefully separate your ribs from your spine, basically treating you like you're a 5-minute craft DIY project. At this point, they're fully in flow state, and stopping there would apparently be too merciful. Then they would pull your ribs outward to create the shape that resembles an eagle with its wings spread, and finally, pull the lungs out through the back and spread them over the ribs. Now, historians still argue about whether this actually happened or if it was just Viking propaganda meant to scare their enemies. But either way, the fact that someone even thought of this is very concerning. At least with the Blood Eagle, it was probably over relatively quickly. Now, let me introduce you to something that was definitely real, and they took their sweet time with it. Judas cradle, also known as the Judas chair, was named after Judas because honestly, this chair is the ultimate betrayal of the entire concept of furniture. So, imagine this. Someone shows you a chair, but this isn't IKEA, so the top isn't actually a seat. It's a pyramid, a sharp, pointed pyramid. Now, here's where it gets diabolical. They would strip you naked, tie you up with ropes, and slowly lower you onto that pyramid point. And depending on whether you were a man or a woman, that point was aimed at, well, let's just say the most sensitive areas. Your rear end or your vaginal area. They're basically trying to get the USB in. But the USB port is you, and the plug is, well, the Spanish invented this beauty in the 16th century because apparently they needed to step up their torture game. The whole point, pun absolutely intended, was to extract information during interrogations. They'd show you the chair, explain what was about to happen, and most people would immediately start talking, but if you didn't talk, they would actually go through with it. Sometimes they'd use oil to make it slide in more easily. At that point, you're not in an interrogation anymore. You're in a historically inaccurate Diddy party. If you've passed out from the pain, they'd pull you off, let you recover, then start again. Basically, a torture subscription model that you cannot cancel. But even if you've survived the initial torture, you'd probably die later from infection, because there's no records of these chairs ever being cleaned. You're getting impaled on a spike that's been inside hundreds of other people. Okay, enough about blood and torture, let's talk about something cute. Rats. Yes, those adorable little rodents. Well, they're about to become significantly less cute. So throughout history, rats have been used for some pretty diabolical purposes, and today I present to you the rat torture. So imagine you're tied to a table, then someone places a rat on your stomach. You're probably thinking, okay, this is weird and uncomfortable, but it's just a rat. How bad can this really be? Well, they put a metal bowl or bucket over the rat, trapping it on your body. Now the rat's confused, but here's where things go completely off the rails. They light a fire on top of the metal container. The metal starts heating up. It gets hotter and hotter, and rats, being intelligent creatures with a survival instinct, and like some people in horror movies, they start looking for an escape route. They can't go through the metal, they can't go up, so they go down through the softest, easiest to dig through material available, which is you, your body, your literal flesh and organs. So now this rat is desperately digging through your stomach, trying to escape the heat, and you're just stuck there experiencing what I can only describe as the worst episode of Tom and Jerry ever made, and You know what? This makes me realize I don't have it that bad. Like, yeah, rent is expensive and the phone bill is outrageous, but at least there's no rat tunneling through my organs. And the crazy part? This method was used in multiple different time periods and places. Ancient China had its version. Medieval Europe put its own spin on it. Game of Thrones referenced it. And somehow it even popped up in Too Fast, Too Furious of all places. Because nothing says street racing like medieval torture methods, I guess. Before we move on, I have an important question for you. Remy from Ratatouille, Stuart Little, Jerry from Tom and Jerry. Kiss, marry, kill. Let us know in the comments. Personally, I'm killing Stuart Little. That little dude has always given me bad vibes. Something about him is just off. Now let me tell you about something that sounds harmless at first, but then becomes your worst nightmare. Okay, so when you hear tickle torture, you probably think this is going to be the lightest one on the list, right? Like, how bad can tickling be? Unless you're like me and absolutely hate being tickled. But even then, the worst case scenario is that you pee yourself a little from laughing too hard and embarrass yourself. Yeah, no. This one's about to ruin goats for you forever. So here's the setup. You're tied down, completely immobilized. Your feet are bare, and then someone dips them in salt water. Then they bring in a goat. Now, goats love salt. They're obsessed with it. It's their cocaine. So this goat sees your salty feet and is basically like, oh, hell yeah, snack time. Honestly, worse than those foot fetish accounts on X. You know the ones. Don't pretend you don't. And it starts licking. At first, yeah, it tickles. You're laughing. Seems almost funny. But here's the thing. It doesn't stop. The goat just keeps licking and licking and licking. Your laughter becomes uncontrollable and you can't make it stop. It's not funny anymore. And after a while, the uncontrollable laughter becomes its own form of torture. You start hyperventilating because you can't catch your breath properly between the laughs. You're laughing so hard you start throwing up. You lose control of your bladder. Some people would literally pass out from the lack of oxygen because they couldn't stop laughing long enough to breathe properly. But it gets worse. Because once the goat licks off all the salt, they dip your feet back into the salt water and start the whole thing over again. And here's where it goes from uncomfortable to genuinely horrifying. Goats don't have soft tongues. They're rough, like sandpaper. The goat's standing on business. And after hours of licking, your skin starts breaking down. We're talking raw, open wounds on your feet. So now you've got open wounds. And they keep dipping your feet back into salt water. If you've ever gotten salt at a cut, you know how bad that burns. Now imagine that, except your entire foot is one giant wound, and a goat with a sandpaper tongue keeps going at it. Like, this is literally rubbing salt in the wound. That phrase exists for a reason. And hey, if you're still watching at this point, you're a real one. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any more historically disturbing content. Alright, back to the suffering. Let me introduce you to something that sounds helpful, but your spine would strongly disagree. You know those chiropractor videos on TikTok where someone's back cracks and you're like, ugh, I need that so bad. Well, the rack is basically that, except instead of relief and those satisfying popping sounds, you get lifelong trauma and permanent disability. The rack was widely popular in medieval torture chambers, especially in places like the Tower of London. Like, every torture chamber had one. Here's how it worked. They would strap your wrists to one end of a wooden frame and your ankles to the other. Then someone would start turning a handle that would slowly pull your limbs in opposite directions. At first, it probably just feels like a stretch. Maybe kinda even nice for like 3 seconds. But then, they keep turning. Your joints start separating. Your shoulders dislocate with a pop. Your hips come out of their sockets. Your spine stretches way beyond what it was ever designed to handle. The sound was apparently one of the worst parts. Imagine hearing your own bones pop and crack, except instead of that satisfying knuckle pop, it's your body literally being torn apart. Some guards allegedly called it nature's symphony, which is absolutely psychotic if you ask me. And you know what? They didn't just jump straight into it either. They would soft launch it at first. Like, they would literally show you the rack before using it, let you watch someone else getting stretched. It's psychological torture before the physical torture even begins. It was so effective at extracting confessions that it was used for hundreds of years. People would confess basically anything just to avoid going on the thing. Did you conspire against the king? Yes, I did. I also kidnapped Madeleine McCann, and I know who really killed JFK. Just don't put me on that thing. But here's a fun historical fact. Most confessions obtained through torture were completely unreliable. People would literally say anything to make it stop. Even Napoleon Bonaparte was like, yeah, torture isn't actually great for getting accurate information. And if Napoleon, a dude who conquered half of Europe, is saying that your interrogation methods are ineffective, that might be a sign to rethink things. But if you thought the rack was bad, let me tell you something the British did to Irish rebels that's somehow even more creative and even more messed up. Honestly, this wasn't even that long ago. We're talking late 1700s, specifically during the 1798 rebellion. Here's how it worked. First, they would take a crude paper hat. Then they'd fill it with boiling hot liquid tar. Then they would force that burning tar-filled cap onto your head, burning through your scalp immediately. Your scalp's literally being cooked. The smell of your own burning hair and flesh. The tar seeping into every follicle. It's a nightmare. But it didn't stop at the burn. They let the tar cool and harden on your head. And then, this is where it becomes truly sadistic. They ripped it off. And what comes with it? Your skin, your tissue, hair follicles, chunks of your skull. Honestly, this is basically how your girl describes getting a Brazilian. Here's the extra disturbing part. This wasn't meant to kill you, no. The British specifically designed this to torture you and mark you. And if you've somehow survived and escaped, everyone would know that you were a rebel because you'd have this horrific scarring on your head for the rest of your life. And the historical timing makes it even wilder. While this was all happening, other parts of the world were starting to move towards more humane forms of punishment. There are literally documented cases of this actually happening to real people. It is a known practice. The British, for real, have crazy PR because how do you go from something like this to being known for bland food, football, and royal drama? That rebrand deserves its own case study. Honestly, just be glad this isn't happening today because you'd immediately have to book a trip to Turkey after this. Anyway, if ripping someone's scalp off sounds bad, let's talk about removing something even worse. Your entire outer layer. Flaying is exactly what it sounds like. Removing someone's skin. Just peeling it off. And if you're wondering why anyone would do this, well, humans are capable of some truly horrific things. Just look at the recent Epstein files. The Assyrians were doing this back in 883 BCE. That's almost 3,000 years ago. There are carvings showing the process pretty clearly. The method itself was simple but absolutely agonizing. They would make surgical cuts and then slowly peel the skin away using knives or other tools, usually starting from the top and working downward. And flaying wasn't always an immediate death sentence. Remove a little skin, you might survive, though you would be scarred and traumatized for life. Remove too much and you're looking at shock, blood loss, infection, usually fatal. It really depended on how far the torturer wanted to go. This practice continued well into the medieval period. Sometimes it was used as execution, other times as torture for information. Though, as we've established, torture is terrible at actually getting reliable information. People will say anything when you're literally peeling their skin off. The Romans had their own version as well. The martyrdom of St. Bartholomew is famously depicted in art, and it's not pleasant to look at. Maybe it should have been redacted too. And honestly, the psychological buildup might have been just as bad as the act itself. Watching knives being prepared, knowing what was coming, it was all part of maximizing fear before the physical torture even started. But if you think getting your literal skin removed is pretty bad, let me tell you about a device that was so precisely engineered it makes you wonder if medieval torturers had a PhD in biomechanical engineering. It's the 1400s to 1700s. The Spanish Inquisition is in full swing, and someone designs what looks like to be a wooden horse. Except on top of this horse is a single sharp wooden wedge, about 8 inches wide, set at a 45-degree angle, not a cute angle. This one was specifically designed to torture women. Just like the Judas cradle, they'd strip you naked, tie your hands, and lower you onto that wedge. The difference is that the wedge would lodge right between your genitals and your anus. And here's where it gets worse. They didn't use metal because it was too smooth and you might die too quickly. Can't have efficiency ruining the vibe. They used wood specifically because it splinters. Those splinters would embed in tissue, maximize damage, and somehow avoid major arteries so you wouldn't bleed out immediately. Average survival time was 4 to 6 hours. The record was 17 hours and 43 minutes. But you know what? This wasn't really about religion or justice. It was about money. They would target wealthy women, widows who owned land, businesswomen, and accuse them of witchcraft, heresy, or adultery. Within days of the accusation, the church would seize all their property. Then the accused would get the Spanish donkey treatment until they confessed. After the confession, they'd be executed. And guess what? Their land would get auctioned off, often to the very people who accused them or to church officials. Between 1627 and 1632, historians analyzed 739 cases and found the exact same pattern every single time. Wealthy woman, accusation, property seized, Spanish donkey confession, execution. Land sold at half value to someone connected to the church or the accuser. It was literally a business model. These executions continued until 1874. The telephone was being invented, the light bulb was on the way, and somewhere in Europe, someone was still using a medieval torture device to kill women for their property. So yeah, next time someone romanticizes the medieval times after binge-watching Bridgerton, remind them that the good old days also included weaponizing religion for real estate fraud. And now, to close this out, let me tell you about something that makes everything else on this list look quick and efficient by comparison. Last but definitely not least, we got lingqi, also known as death by 1,000 cuts or slow slicing, which was practiced in China. The process, well, it's exactly what it sounds like. You'd be tied to a post in public, and an executioner would slowly cut pieces off your body. Small pieces. The goal was to keep you alive and conscious for as long as possible while inflicting maximum pain. They wanted you to feel every single cut. The executioners were trained professionals, by the way. They knew exactly where to cut to avoid vital organs, how deep they could go, and how to keep you from bleeding out too fast. The torture could last hours or even days. Records show some victims received hundreds of cuts before finally dying. And yes, the crowds would gather to watch because apparently medieval Asia had the same energy as medieval Europe when it came to public executions being entertainment. One famous case was Yuan Chongwan, a Ming Dynasty general. Despite there being little evidence against him, he was found guilty of treason and was given the lingqi treatment. It took half a day for him to die, and according to historical records, people hated him so much that they collected his body parts afterward because they wanted to eat his flesh. History is wild, y'all. I'm just glad mukbang YouTubers did not exist back then. This punishment was so brutal and effective that even as China modernized, it took until 1905 for it to be officially abolished. People were flying airplanes and developing photography, but they were still using medieval torture methods. So yeah, after all that, I think we can all safely agree that humanity's track record when it comes to treating each other nicely is not great. The only silver lining here is that most of these practices have been abolished. But hey, if you made it this far, congrats! You've officially got a stronger stomach than most people. Drop a comment and let me know which of these punishments do you think is the absolute worst. Ciao ciao, subscribe now.